Okay. Share my screen.
There we are.
Okay, hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today on this Tuesday, October 19th, 2021. I am Nick Kanoki, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm very excited for today's program on training and certification. But before we get underway, I just want to thank our patron sponsors, Definitive Logic, Onuma System, ABS Quality Evaluations, and ABS Group. We also want to thank our organizational members. Without both patron and organizational members, we would not be able to make this programming possible, as well as our newsletter and other things that the Asset Leadership Network does. So thanks again to all of our members, and especially the Andrew James Advisory Group for their continuing support. And we also want to highlight that they are starting a new course, ALN A55K Professional Certification course, that will begin November 8th. So if you're interested in some ISO 55000 professional development, reach out to the Andrew James Advisory Group through Lindsay or through the Asset Leadership Network. And with that, I just want to say, if you're out there watching, please send any comments, questions, or feedback to the chat or use the Q&A function of the Zoom webinar, because we would love to hear from you. And with that, I think I'll pass it off to Jim Dieter, ALN CEO, to start us off.
Jim, you're muted.
Good call, Lindsay.
It happens to all of us. Anyhow, welcome everybody. Thanks for attending, and thanks to the panelists for participating today. But before I say something, Lindsay, I thought you were going to do a little introductions. Is that right?
I think so, yes. So I want to start by saying my name is Lindsay Zeigler. I'm the president of the Andrew James Advisory Group, and I also have a tendency to be the person who teaches the A55K certification courses. Alex is nodding happily. Thank you, Alex. Our other panelists this morning, or this afternoon, what day is it? Jim Dieter, of course, is the CEO of the Asset Leadership Network. He taught the very first class, and not only that, he developed the vast majority of the material that we use in our class. And of course, we relied on his background as a member of the team that developed the original standard. So Jim has been very instrumental in the work that we do and in our working with the ALN. Nick has introduced himself. Mike Bordenaro is the Director of Communications for the Asset Leadership Network. He said he's going to lurk, but we're probably going to make him say something at some point. We also have with us Richard Dietz from the city of Washington, D.C. And Richard is going to talk about what has happened with ISO 55000 in DC since we taught the first class in 2018. Actually, Jim taught that one. And then we have Alex Barenblitt. Alex is a senior consultant at LMI, and Alex has been instrumental in getting LMI's group of ISO 55000 practitioners certified with the ALN for the A55K certification. And so we'll probably tap Alex to talk a little bit about what a difference that has made to LMI and to the folks there. So Jim, now take it away.
Yeah, I guess my job here today is to provide a little background. As Lindsay said, I was involved in as a head of a delegation, U.S. delegation for the development of ISO 55000, the 2014 version, and which was quite an honor. And it was really out of that we started the Asset Leadership Network out of the U.S. TAG to further promote ISO 55000 and look for win-win-win situations with people in the United States and beyond, which is its own story. So there was, after the development in 2014, after the standards were published, there were already existing asset management classes around the world. And some of those incorporated, started to incorporate ISO 55000 training. There were maintenance and reliability centric classes, there were engineering centric classes. And there was also new classes developed. There's a class for the CAMA certification, Certified Asset Management Assessor, which the focus of that class is on just on 55,000 rather than broader topics as the other ones are, but is focused on being an assessor. You know, when you know the inside baseball of being certified is there's some ISO standards that apply to that. And one of those standards talks about the credentials needed to be a certifying organization, as ABS, quality evaluations, is. And then for the actual persons, the assessors, within that, there's some requirements in the standard, 17-24-5, I think the number is, for the people participating in it. You know, if you're having your system certified, you certainly want to know that you have an expert. There's different ways to get that expertise as laid out in that standard. But as I understand it, I've not taken that class, but the CAMA certification focuses on providing people to fill that role. You know, obviously need to know about ISO 55000. So there's been numerous attempts. There's been a couple classes, yeah, started within the U.S. LCE has, you know, another asset management class, another one of our members. But we were looking for a class, and, you know, I do consulting on the side. When Lindsay mentioned I helped develop the materials, that was as a consultant to Andrew James Advisory Group, not as with my ALN hat on. We all wear lots of hats. But from an ALN perspective, we were, you know, had tried, and different members and people we knew had tried a variety of different classes. And the feedback we were getting is people were looking for a class focused on ISO 55000. So Lindsay and Boyd Beal and Richard Udevilligan from Andrew James Advisory Group approached the ALN and me about a class and a process. And we developed the ALN A55K certification. One of the, you know, it's so typical, and so I'm so proud of the ALN, is we went from the idea of having a certification program and training to have having the training and certification program in place in what, Lindsay, 3 months, something? It was not long. But we weren't trying, the test is about the standard and the training is about the standard. It's not about having years of expertise in asset management. It's not about knowing lots of things beyond what's in the standard. To me, when I was working on the materials, really the target audience was, and I've used it in this way in a consulting role, is an organization is embarking on an asset management journey, going all the way to certification. It makes awesome sense. But even just starting on the path, whether you're aiming for certification or not, you have a team of people that are involved. And as we know, communication and understanding is critical. And I'd have to say the standards, you could say sit down and read the standards, and you would know more when you got done than when you started. But it's not meant as a teaching document. It's meant 55,001 is the standard, and 55,000 is sort of an introduction. It's about asset management and the fundamentals and principles. And 55,002 is about a lot of how to do things, some consultant work, all very useful, but it's not designed to be a training program and not designed to take people from zero to where they need to be. So I had one consulting opportunity where I was working with a company that wanted to be certified. And we had, a small group of people, 6 or 7 people from various departments, from facilities department and quality people and government property management people. And we had IT asset management people, but we let them get away, et cetera. And we taught this class, and it did exactly what we had hoped it would do. From the people that were very experienced in asset management to the people that barely knew what you were talking about when you said those words. Hey, I'm the new facilities management person, and I just got this job, and before that I was doing something else entirely. And at the end of a week, worth the 3 or 4 days that we actually spent on the class training, everybody was on the same page. Everybody understood what we were talking about, the words we were using, how we use the words, and how to work together. So that's why we've described the training and the certification is about providing people the information they need to be a part of a team implementing ISO 55000. And to our knowledge, it's still unique in that angle and being focused on ISO 55000. And well, it's certainly individuals taking it. There's great value, but I think that value, it's not designed as a train the trainer class. It's designed as to train the group class. But even individuals can, gain a lot of information, certainly very useful. They could go back to their organization. So I think, it's been, the uptake has been good. As with, ISO, I would expect the uptake of the training and the certification to, follow the same curve as the uptake of 55,000 in the US. And we all know with the COVID, we've had a lull. Lindsay will tell you about how they pivoted through that, I think very successfully. But we're really looking to this to be a major opportunity. If we get to the point where the Department of Defense or the civilian agencies or any agency in particular says, all right, we're going to do ISO 55000 and you people need to get smart on it. This training class will be ready to go, and the certification will be a designation that people know what they're talking about and are ready to participate. How's that, Lindsay? Is that good?
That's excellent. Thank you, Jim. That matter of fact, that covered some of what I was going to say, which is fine.
Sorry.
Well, we're pretty much on the same page in terms of this training regimen, and I think we both value the same things about it. So a couple of things that I wanted to mention. First of all, we talk about A55K certification and ISO 55000 certification. And we always make a very strong point when we're talking about this training that we're certifying that an individual understands the ISO 55000 standard. That's what this certification is. It's not an organizational certification. That's a completely different thing. That's the CAMA that Jim was talking about. And that is, I think in the US, the ABS quality evaluations does that certification. Or you can self-certify. There's a number of ways, and we cover that in the course. The other thing that the course isn't is it's not what Mike refers to as wrench turning. We're teaching the standard. We're not teaching mean time to repair, mean time between failures, maintenance intervals. There are a number of really excellent organizations teaching those things now. The IAM has just fabulous courses for teaching how to physically maintain your assets. The standard is more, from our perspective, is more about that stuff is good and it's excellent and you need to do that, but how do you tie that up higher into the organization with what your organizational goals and objectives are and what your organizational strategies are? And that's really the emphasis of the course. It's the strategic and the tactical, but not the operational, is the way we usually put it. One of the things that Jim mentioned that I wanted to emphasize a little bit is we always get questions about, well, is this going to be on the test, or is that going to be on the test? And it was especially tricky when we were using the CEO of the ALN as a consultant to build our materials, and the ALN was developing a certification exam. We wanted to be very, very certain that we weren't teaching to a test. So we teach to the standard, and we literally don't know what's on the test. Now, and I say that, yes, I took the test in 2018. And so I've pretty much forgotten what the questions were. And I apologize in advance to everybody who takes the class. I'm not going to be able to tell you, except in broad general terms, what the test covers. And the other thing that we don't do and that is not available is, if you've taken any kind of a grad school entrance exam, like the GMAT or any of those exams, or even the SAT and the ACT, you can go out and buy a prep course. And those prep courses typically will present you with a set of questions gleaned from prior exams. This course is not that. We want you to understand the standard. We believe that if you understand the standard, you will pass the exam. And in fact, we have a pass rate in the high 90s. So, and very, very infrequently, Jim, if I remember, have we even had anybody who needed to retake the exam? I think maybe 2. And then they passed on the second try. So we have processes in place for if people have trouble. So far, we've never had to invoke them. So, okay, Nick can come in and talk about the remote test. Nick, can you do that for us? Talk a little bit about how the remote testing works. It means you have to unmute yourself.
Sure, yeah. We use Proctorio, a remote proctor, so that people in this time of COVID, or, for whatever convenience is necessary, can be able to take a test from their home or, a coffee shop or wherever they might need to. But we do have to use a remote proctor so that we can say, look, this is a representation of a person's knowledge, not what they found on the internet or whatever. But we've had good luck with that. It is a bit of a rigmarole to get your webcam and speaker and everything to allow Proctorio access and whatnot, but I don't believe there's been anyone who, without some troubleshooting, couldn't make it work. So that's been good, and it gives us, it helps our certification mean something to just say that, look, this was, again, someone's knowledge, not, there's no cheating involved. Other than that, I would say, it's 50 questions, and people generally do it in about an hour. Pretty reasonable for a test, and covers a lot of what you would learn about the standard should you take the course.
Yep.
Anything I'm missing there?
It's a closed book exam. And there are questions that are maybe a little tricky, but there are no deliberate trick questions. Yes, Nick is certified. Nick passed the test. Mike is reminding me of that. Everyone who is on this panel has passed this test. So, although Richard and I took it on paper way back a long time ago. So thank you for that, Nick. I appreciate that that feedback. Yeah, it can be a little tricky to get the exam going because of the remote proctoring, but Nick has provided excellent support for people, and I think we've never had anybody who can't manage to take the exam. What I'd like to do now is kind of segue to Richard Dietz from the City of Washington, D.C. And Richard, I got to tell you, I mention you and your group in every class that we have. When we start talking about things like data integrity, it's a fabulous example of the value of managing your data assets. So, Nick? Richard, sorry.
I think you're on mute, Richard.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for that nice introduction, Lindsay. I appreciate that. So what I'd like to share with you all is application of the ISO 55000 principles and how we're applying those principles at the District of Columbia. I'm sharing my screen, so I hope everybody can see it. There's a lot of information. I am going to go pretty quick, and there's a lot to talk about. So we'll jump right on in. So this presentation I'm going to give on ISO 55000 is from the lens of capital budgeting. So I work within the capital budgeting department, and I look at all the district's assets. So for us to apply the ISO 55000 principles, we can boil it down to four. And this is in terms of the capital budgeting, into four concepts for capital budgeting. One, what are the assets that we need to be maintained? Two, what is the quality of the assets that we have? Three, how will we prioritize our capital needs? And four, how much funding is available to address capital needs and asset maintenance? So for the first part, what assets do we have that need to be maintained? So we're a city, right? So this is a District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. We have over 300,000 assets. Like a vehicle is one asset, a building is one asset. All of our agencies have their own internal data sources. What we've done is we've tied into those individual data sources, and we consolidate that information into a data warehouse. And we do consume it through a data system that we call CARS, Capital Asset Replacement Scheduling System, but you do not need to have that to do what I'm about to show you. But you do need to understand the assets that you have. So what we've done is there's 13 different data sources maintained by the agencies. Like one does fleet, one does roads, one does like bike shares, one does the master address repository, like Office of Tax and Revenue, where they do all the buildings and land records. So we know what assets we have through data systems, and we're tied into the data systems. This is another way of looking at what assets that we need to maintain. So for us, we're tracking 316,000 assets. That's a total of $12 billion. What are the quality of my assets? That's the second item. What is the quality of the assets we have? This is an example of roads, the next two slides. So the district, it's kind of small. We have 1,166 miles of roads, and this is for the district. So we can, and we're broken up into wards over here in the district. So we know what roads are within what wards, but we can go even a little bit deeper. We put condition on our roads. So we know whether our roads are in excellent condition, good, fair, poor, or very poor. We can do this with fleet. We can do this with buildings. So we can do it with every asset that we own. So that's how we do the quality of our assets. So there's actually, for roads, PCI, pavement condition index. Every asset has a condition variable that you can track. This is another slide of what are the quality of my assets. This is fleet. For the district, we have 6,000 vehicles, like 90 ambulances, 28 pumper trucks, so on and so forth. We have a lot of vehicles. In this one slide right here, at the very bottom, circling with a mouse, I don't know if you can see or not, but we could tell how many assets are about to fail in terms of fleet. I have 1,661 assets that are about to fail, but I also have 1,429 assets that are in the green that are good. We know every asset all the way down to the VIN number, even the color of the vehicle. We know the amount of assets, and we know the quality of those assets. This is just another example of the quality of the assets. This is the fire department. Like there's the 98 ambulances, so on and so forth. And on the right-hand side, we track items on every vehicle, but this just happens to be the fire department. So we know how much maintenance we're putting in the vehicles. We know the average age, the average mileage. It's a lot of data points that we're pulling into a centralized system that we can use to track when they need to be replaced. Another example of assets, of the quality of my assets, this is the fleet. Again, red, yellow, orange, green. For green, I'm good, red, I'm bad, and the yellow and the orange are points in between. So the third point of the four key things that we do in the districts as far as the ISO 55000 principles is how will we prioritize our capital needs. This is fun. The next 2 points are really interesting, I think. The prioritizing and ranking of capital projects, you're going to want to bring in people to make the system work. And the way we bring in people to make our system work is we bring in experts. So we have experts in land, in building, in fleet, in IT, in equipment, in art. And we formed sort of a board. And every year we do our capital budgets annually, and they're a rolling 6 years. Every year we sit down, we huddle around the table, and we prioritize our assets. We have to prioritize our assets because every agency, there's about 33 agencies that are participate in our capital process, and everybody wants everything. There's not enough money to go around. You're going to see that in some slides coming up. So we have to ranking from the top project all the way down to the bottom project. Like oftentimes the bottom project is a dog park. I don't know why. And the top project could be like building a school. So we prioritize our rankings, our projects. This next slide is how we prioritize. It's a two-part slide because it's just too big to fit onto one. But we can prioritize a roof repair on a same 100-point scale that we can prioritize like a dog park, or a fleet, or building a building. So we have a ranking system. This is what we sit down with those group of experts, and we go through every capital project and we prioritize them. This is a second part of that same page. So this is just one legal page. It's actually a pretty in-depth prioritization and scoring. This is something that you could develop in your own work environment. You do not need a system. This is done in Excel, and you can actually adopt this now. So this is these next two slides. I think these are really fun. The prioritization and ranking of capital projects is slide 1 of 2. This is fun because this sort of describes in a picture everyone's dilemma when it comes to everyone, meaning we're a city and other cities. Agencies are asking for a lot of money. Our agencies in every 6-year period typically ask around $12 billion, but we only have $8 billion in funding. So that means $4 billion of projects every year you have to say no. And so this is a great example of that. It might be hard to see. I don't know how small it is on your screen, but there's a thin little red line. Well, first of all, each of these bars is a year. So our budget that you're looking at is 2021 to 2026. We do a 6-year rolling budget. And there's a red line that sort of goes in the middle all the way across. That's our available funding. So you'll see projects above the available funding and projects below. It's just a visualization that there's more projects being requested than there is funding. And how do you solve for this? Well, I'm going to go to the next slide that shows this being solved. In this next slide on the very far right, it might be hard to see, but there's a column called excluded. Those are all the projects that we cannot do. So we cannot build a new jail. We cannot build a new hospital. There's a new bridge. There's a lot of projects that we could not do. We push them to the right, they're excluded. We're tracking them, and that's a whole other discussion, the cost of inaction. And that's a whole separate discussion to have. But all of the columns on the left, those are the projects that were approved. The funding line that was red and the other screen is now green. Every single one of the projects below this green line are getting approved. These are the highest ranking projects. Next slide, this is the same in the very bottom right, grand total blue. It says $4.257 billion. That's $4 billion of projects that we could not do. So I'm going to go back up a slide. All of these projects that the agencies requested, there's this big excluded column. And here's that big excluded column again. This slide is all about the exclusions. And I think this is something that's not getting enough attention, and people really need to track this, the cost of inaction. What is happening with the projects that I can't do? Everybody wants to know what I can do. Everybody wants a new school, a new recreation center. What about what you can't do? Well, we're tracking what you can't do. This is a $4.27 billion. And because of the way we build our projects, we know, and we're breaking these down into buckets. Like the 4.27 million is broken down by IT. So we can't afford 172 million of IT, equipment and regulatory, can't afford 78 million in equipment, fleet, 179 million in fleet, horizontal infrastructure, the roads, highways, bridges, there's 740 million that we can't afford. And facilities, where most of our work is, we can't afford 3 billion in facilities. So all good stuff, all worthwhile tracking. And the only way you can do it is by following these principles, and you're tracking every single asset all the way down to its smallest detail. And for us, the smallest detail is you have to be greater than $10,000. That's just our threshold. So that $4.257 billion we track all the way through, and eventually, and hopefully we'll get that funded later on down the road. But again, that's a whole separate discussion. So I'm going to wrap this up with conclusion of what ISO 55000 has done for us. And I think the biggest thing that it has done, single E, is this third item. I'm moving my mouse on it, but you can't see it, but it says bond ratings upgraded across the board, including a AAA by Moody's. Moody's increased us from AA to AAA. We got an additional $200 million worth of borrowing power. That is a big deal. That is a huge win. Just by following these principles, it increased the borrowing power of the district. So big win just by following the principles. That's the end of my this presentation. So I hope it helped. Hope you learned something from it. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Richard. That was great. I'm looking at your unmet needs grid and thinking, dang, I could have used that when I had all those IT users beating on me because their stuff wasn't getting done because something else was a higher priority. And just making that visible in that bar chart, I think, is really key to be able to say, guys, this is what I have the funding to accomplish. And this is what I can't accomplish at the current levels of funding. I did want to mention that the very first class that we ever had was hosted by the folks at the DC government, and Dave Clark, who I believe was the CFO, introduced the class and came in and popped in periodically. They were wonderful hosts. We had at least 4 people from the district in the class who ended up getting certified. And we really appreciate their hosting that and allowing us to kick off the very first class and learn what works and what maybe, actually there wasn't much that didn't work really well. It was pretty amazing, I think. So thank you for that. I want to skip over to Alex for a minute and let Alex, if you would talk about what the classes have meant to LMI.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Lindsay. What Richard described is really a very good practical application of ISO 55000. LMI is a consultancy that provides support to federal agencies. We started as Logistics Management Institute, and so you can imagine we're heavy in logistics. At the beginning, just so you know how LMI got involved in ISO 55000, at the beginning of COVID, many of us at LMI, understandably, were told that we couldn't come in and do work for our clients. So we were looking for meaningful work. And just it occurred to me, and I've known Jim for quite a few years through the National Property Management Association and his work on the US tag. And so it occurred to me, well, LMI has people that know personal property. I'm one of them. I'm a property geek, if you will. We have people that understand facilities. We have people that understand infrastructure and sustainability and that kind of stuff. And it occurred to me, what about getting a couple of us trained in ISO 55000? It's a useful use of our time. We could get trained up. And I thought I might get 3-4 people signed up. So I broadcast across our logistics team who might be interested in ISO 55000 with the blessing of my management. And we ended up going in 3 different waves of classes, getting 44 people, I think it was, 44 people trained and certified in A55K. Did anybody in my company, least of all me, I expect us to get more than a couple? Nope. The good news is for LMI and for its clients, we have 40-some people A55K certified that understand the standard across all forms of assets. And one of the benefits to us LMI and to our clients is for all of us across that spectrum of types of assets, me being a former professional photographer, I'll use the term, it opened up our aperture. Everything that I had known and worked with and cared about for managing government property was limited to essentially equipment and material, personal property. I really didn't have any awareness about facilities and infrastructure and that kind of stuff. And likewise, LMI has people who are civil engineers that understand facilities management, that engineering stuff. And they really had very little understanding about personal property. And for all of us across the spectrum of types of assets, it opened up our aperture, as I said, so that we have a better understanding of how to manage assets as a whole. And one of the beauties that has enabled LMI and other consultancies is to help agencies with COVID think through, how does the mix of assets in context with each other, how can that best change? How should it change with the new workforce model, or what we've come to call the new normal? We're not the only ones to use that phrase. But the point is, think about it. If you have more of your workforce that's remote, what kind of assets do they need at the remote workplace? Do you need the same kind of floor plan in a building that you used to have? Do you need fewer offices, more hoteling space, presuming people are masked or vaccinated and that kind of stuff? Will there be a need for more data center assets or less? Will more work be done in the cloud? I use that phraseology because I spent 20 years at the former Digital Equipment Corporation, and to me, the cloud is nothing more than what we used to call, well, you know, anyway, distance computing. But regardless, the marketing phrase of the cloud is kind of entertaining. But the point is that buildings, the management of buildings needs to take into account not just the building itself, but the floor space and how it's arranged, the people that work there, how they are arranged best, and also, do you need maybe more effort to get rid of excess assets to make, and you'll need less real property? So there's a possibility for significant cost savings and efficiencies. So that's kind of that's what we LMI are now armed to help federal agencies to think through. And that's been the major benefit to LMI and to its clients. All the agencies are thinking that through, some further along than others, of course. But I think it's fair to say that no agency that I can think of thinks that things are going to go back to exactly the way they were before COVID hit. That's just an example.
I think you're exactly right. And I'm glad you brought up the pandemic and COVID, because one of the things that I did forget to mention was when we were first faced with the pandemic, we had to scramble a bit because we had never given any kind of a remote class. Our classes were delivered in person on site. And there is a lot of value to that, but it was not something we could safely do during the height of the pandemic. So we now have two different delivery modes for the class. We have not delivered an online class or an in-person class, I'm sorry, for almost 2 years now, year and a half and change.
And if I may, all of LMI's people that got certified went through the virtual class that included some self-learning. It was a hybrid, if you will. So it was time away, time with groups, and then also regular sessions with Lindsay, thank you, to help talk through the commonalities of what the different teams learned in the process. And that was extremely useful.
Yeah. And I do want to give a shout out to the SAMP development exercise. We actually, towards the end of the second week of the online class, excuse me, we put together teams of people to work with an existing case study that we developed to create a strategic asset management plan. Because a strategic asset management plan is linchpin of ISO 55000.
And takes into account, if you forgive my interruption,
sure,
please, it takes into account some of the very basic principles of ISO 55000, keeping in mind all the different stakeholders, the tone at the top from leadership. It takes all that into account as you're developing a strategic asset management plan, because the need is the mission and serving the mission of the organization and the mission of the stakeholders.
Yeah, exactly. And we've gotten some really interesting strategic asset management plans from the students. They're all very different. We had one that was really brief, like 3 pages, but it covered everything that was needed, which was like totally phenomenal. And that was one of the LMI groups. And all the way up to like 20, 22 pages, nobody wrote a book because we tell them up front, if you write a book, I'm not going to read it. Because the SAMP is supposed to be a living document that is looked at and used in the organization. And we tend to contrast that with, I know for a long time, companies would go out and pay a lot of money to an Arthur Andersen or an Ernst & Young or whoever, or one of the big accounting firms to develop a strategic plan that we used to joke that the value of those was measured by how much water they would displace in a bathroom fixture. They tend to sit on a shelf and they tend to not get updated. And honestly, one of the issues with those long-term strategic plans is the pace of change in business is insane. And you can't tell me that you have any idea what's going to happen 10 years from now or even 5 years from now. So you build your strategic asset management plan not based on here's where we want to be 10 years from now. It's more of a here's what we're going to do and how we're going to tie our strategy to our asset management. So it's much more of a, yes, thank you, Nick. Nick says the only constant is change. It's much more of a here's what we're going to do. And it's much more immediate, I think, than some of these long-term strategic plans. So that's my commercial for that. Richard, in our previous conversation just before this, you mentioned that you had some fun stuff going on in DC that you said you wouldn't bring it up, but we said we were going to ask you. So would you like to talk a little bit about what else you've got that's going on?
Sure, Lindsay. So the fun stuff, and I think it's fun. I don't know if anybody else would really think it's fun, but I think it's a lot of fun, actually. Unmet need, the consequences of inaction. So that 4.2 billion that you saw that was on the sheet, we're breaking that down into 4 buckets, right? Building, facilities, fleet, equipment, art, IT, and such. We know exactly what we cannot afford. So that's just as important as what you can afford. So the prioritization and all that, that's great. You're spending your money wisely. That is really, really good. But there's actually a whole many divisions within our city that are really interested in what we cannot afford, what we can't do. So like Office of Planning, the people that do the census and items as such, they're interested in partnering with other agencies. And what better way to do that than finding the projects that could not be done, that could not be afforded, band those projects together and create something new. So by applying the ISO 55000 principles, you're doing a great way to spend your money, but you can also now look at your money and projects that you could not afford or you do not have. That's a whole separate bucket, a whole different game. And people are interested in that. What I could not do, what I could not build. There's ways to project that cost of inaction as well. It's easy to say that there's CPI 3% next year. You don't build a bridge now, it's going to be 3% next year. Well, you look at your fleet. If you don't replace that vehicle, we have 98 ambulances, and we're securing all our ambulances and vehicles. But in situations where you could not get one, well, you're going to need additional operating expense. So by applying these principles, we know exactly which asset we could not afford. We could project additional operating expense as well to keep those assets covered and going forward. But you can also do great and fun things with other agencies, bundling projects together and making a new project. So something that Parks and Recreation could not afford. And maybe there's something that schools could not afford. Maybe it's something common they're trying to do together, like a playground, right? You need a playground school, you need a playground recreation center, not enough money to go around. Those projects got dropped. Well, you might be able to make something new within that district, that area, that those two agencies could band together and create a whole new project. So there's ways to turn the lemons into lemonade, if you'll let me use that old saying. So that's the fun. I think that's a whole other topic and conversation. And prioritization of what you could not do, the cost of inaction, you can calculate that. So that's the fun. I think it's fun, and that's a whole separate discussion that goes deeper than what I just said. So yeah, I find that exciting. The consequences of inaction.
That is, and that ties back to the concept of risk within the standard, right? If you have an ambulance that's on at death's door and you can't afford to replace it, you may not have an ambulance when you need it.
So it
And
becomes
what's
a
the
morgue.
risk of that?
It becomes a more. It becomes a morgue. Ha ha.
Yeah, that might have been an extreme example, but yes, so absolutely, you got to track that, what you can't afford, and there are consumers of that data as well. I never knew that there was an agency that wanted to know what we could not afford, and lo and behold, there they were. We had the information, and we could give that information to that agency, specifically what the asset was, and by year, right? So yes, I think it's
And
fun.
all of that ties back into reasons for that bond rating increase, right? I remember that in the class, I think it was Dave who mentioned that it was either you or Dave, Richard, and I apologize for not remembering, but mentioned that just having the data that was reliable was a large part of the reason why the bond rating went up, because the rating agencies said, now we believe your asset data.
Yes, it's not just only understanding, but having a plan. And so we have a plan to get all of those assets that were unfunded, funded within a 10-year period. So identifying to the investors like Moody's and such, sure, we knew what we could not afford, but we also had a plan, increase PAYGO, and this is getting out of my area of expertise, but we had a plan to tackle all of those unmet needs. And the only reason why I'm bringing that up is in the state of California, there's a city that ran into the similar situation, but they got downgraded because they did not have a plan to address. They identified what they could not afford. That's great. That's half the step. But they did not present a plan on what they're going to do to tackle that. And they got downgraded. So you have to be, it's a very fine line. You have to walk it tightly, but it certainly helped. And it is something I think that anybody could pick up and do without spending millions of dollars. The prioritization you could do, you just need a group of people. You need a committed group of people, because that can take days. And a lot of that prioritization can happen in Excel. So yeah, there's things you can do right now to achieve what we achieve.
And if I may leap on that, you need a group of people, as you were saying, Richard. You need a group of people with a variety of perspectives.
Right.
I talked earlier about the widening the aperture, and it's sort of like you take property geeks like me, you take facilities geeks, and you get them in a room together, and they can appreciate the context of each other and how managing the priorities is not just one. So a lot of people call them silos. A friend of mine calls them cylinders of excellence. If you can group the cylinders of excellence, if you will, because people are really good at facilities, people are really good at personal property. If you can get them in the same room or in the same virtual room working together, they can appreciate each other's perspective and work together to maximize the whole, not just pieces.
And some of that actually can start in the classroom.
Yep.
Or in the virtual classroom.
Indeed.
I've gotten feedback from almost every class that one of the things in which they found a lot of value was just the conversation with other people in the class.
Yeah.
Just hearing the different.
A question came up earlier about the test, and you were describing the test. After the class, you take the test, and Nick covered how the proctoring goes on. I will say this: everybody on the panel has taken the test, and I will say this about the test: it is by no means trivial. It takes a lot of work to prepare. It takes a lot of attention, and that the classwork and follow up to absorb all that material. But it is not brutal. I know people that have taken tests like the PMP or the CPA exam or the bar, and they're brutal. The questions that are asked in the A55K test are hard, but they're not intentionally misleading or double and triple negatives that you got to figure out the wording on, and it's nothing like that.
Yeah, there's no intent to deceive,
right?
And there's no intent to trick you,
right?
There's the intent is to gauge your level of understanding of the standard.
Yeah.
This is Jim. My video is not starting for some reason, but I just wanted to mention regarding we mentioned earlier about here's my video.
There it is.
About developing the test. And I wanted to say we had a separate certification committee that developed the test. So I myself have taken the test, but I've never wasn't involved in developing the questions. So just there is an ISO standard. Of course, there's an ISO standard for everything, but there's an ISO standard on certifications tests. And while we haven't paid for the certification, we did design the certification program in compliance with that ISO standard. So it's it's high quality and has all the appropriate protections.
It does. And we are very grateful to the folks at the ALN for working with us on this. It's been a fun ride. I got back into teaching after not doing it for many years, and I find that I really enjoy it when I'm teaching adults.
I just wanted.
It looks like Nick's about to interrupt us here.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly say that I'm not a asset management professional. I didn't have a background in that. And so it was really helpful and cool for me to be able to take the A55K course and get a better understanding of the industry of asset management, as well as, this standard that's kind of leading the way around the world for how to get the most value out of this profession, asset management, and how it is a part of every aspect of an organization, or can bring value to every part of an organization. And before, I just wanted to take a minute to thank our sponsors in case anyone has to sign off at the end of the hour here. Again, that's patron sponsors Definitive Logic, Onuma System, ABS Quality Evaluations, and ABS Group, as well as our organizational members, especially Andrew James Advisory Group with Lindsay Zeigler here. And just a note that they are launching another ALN A55K Professional Certification course on November 8th. So please reach out to Lindsay if you're interested in that. And then I guess I was gonna just ask if anyone from the panel has any kind of closing comments, or feels like we missed talking about something.
A couple things that I missed. We have a Spanish language course that is also available. And it is available both in classroom, although again, nobody's doing that right now, and in the same online format or hybrid format that we use. Probably, I think there's a Spanish language session later this week, maybe. And Daniel Ortiz Ruiz is our primary instructor for the course. And Daniel is a great guy. He is also A55K certified, which was quite a challenge because he certified in English. Yeah, if anybody needs a Spanish language course, then you could contact us and we could get you in contact with Danielle. They're very strong right now down in Colombia. They've got a requirement that I believe it's water utilities must certify to ISO 55000, and there are other Central and South American countries that are also looking at mandating. So there's probably going to be a lot happening there. The other thing that I wanted to mention, we have 100 or so people who are A55K certified at this point. And we are working with the ALN to create a LinkedIn group to connect the A55K members, or the A55K laureates, if you will, together. And we think that can provide some real value and help facilitate some conversations. We brought it up like the day before this conference started, so it's probably not going to happen until right after the conference. I don't understand why. I mean, it's not like Mike and Nick and Jim have anything else to do. So I want to thank those guys in advance, and thank the ALN for giving us the opportunity to talk about our training program, and hopefully somebody who is listening today is interested in the training. And Nick has, or Mike, I guess, has put my email out there in the chat if you need that, or you can always go to andrewjamesadvisory.com and you can get to us that way as well. Anybody else have a last word that they'd like to insert in there? Alex,
let me just say that I think in addition to agreeing with everything Lindsay said and saying what a great job they do, if you're working in an organization that you'd like to see get more involved in asset management and ISO 55000, having this class taught, to your organization or participating in it is a great way to accelerate understanding and appreciation for the difference that the standard can make in your organization. Because again, it's really all about the standard and the structured approach to asset management that we're all endorsing and supporting. So thank you very much, Lindsay.
thank you. Thank you, Nick and Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex and Richard.
And Alex and Richard, thank you for your time. We really appreciate that.
My pleasure, certainly.